It is another big week for tariffs, and guess what? Donald Trump is being called a taco again by Wall Street. Not an actual taco, but taco, which means Trump always chickens out. It was a name that was first coined back in April when Donald Trump first announced tariffs and then kind of changed his mind, changed the deadlines, etc. He'd promised that they were going to do 90 deals in 90 days, but the deadline for that has passed, and now Donald Trump has changed the deadline. He's moved it forward, and he's sent out a lot of letters.
Now we've made a deal with United Kingdom, we've made a deal with China, we've made a deal, we're close to making a deal with India. Others we met with, and we don't think we're going to be able to make a deal, so we just send them a letter. If you want to play ball, you have to. This is what you have to pay.
So, does Donald Trump have a well thought out economic plan, or is this chaos, confusion, and failure? Welcome to Americast.
Americast from BBC News.
Hello, it is Anthony in the American headquarters of Americast.
And it is me, Marianna, aka Misinformation, in the worldwide headquarters of Americast in London. And we have a special guest in the worldwide headquarters today, who is the BBC's economics editor, Faisal Islam, and also the one of the self-confessed tariff obsessives.
Oh, yeah.
So just who we want to have in the studio today. What should Americasters know about you, Faisal? And if they've not listened to you or heard you before, which I'm sure they probably have.
Well, I love a chart. I love numbers. I actually never thought that my economics degree would be as useful as it has become under this president. In fact, I think I managed to sort of really major on international trade theory all those years ago in my economics degree. And as I said, never would I have imagined in my lifetime putting it into. We assumed we put it into practice with developing countries. I'll just put it like that. It was always the assumption that the West, and in particular America, would be the vanguard of free trade. That changes.
Yeah, I remember taking economics classes in college as well. I probably took a half dozen of them. And the one thing that was drilled into my head at the time was that free trade is good. Tariffs are a drag on the economy. Anyone who's talking about tariffs is talking about harming not only their economy, but the whole world. So it is kind of jarring here to be looking at this in new light because Donald Trump is doing nothing but pushing tariffs in his second term.
I feel like tariffs just come back again and again. It's a bit like how much we talk about Elon Musk. Not quite the same, though. And I guess let's start then with this big week for the tariffs, for Trump's tariffs. This deadline happened on Wednesday and it passed. What was actually meant to happen, Faisal? Like, what did we expect to happen?
You have to go back to April and to Liberation Day and that famous blue board that I remember sort of staring at a very small screen in BBC HQ trying to decipher before I ran onto our main evening 10 o'clock news to announce the tariff rate, hoping my eyesight had been able to discern each pixel correctly. And we can discuss the rationale and the reasons, because I think the White House would see it differently from from many in the rest of the world as to why they weren't enacted more quickly. But the bottom line is, partly, I would say, at the behest of the US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, this was delayed, partly because of market ructions. This was delayed by 90 days, separate track for China. We'll park that for a minute. And that 90-day pause was due to unpause on Wednesday, just gone, on the 9th of July. And in that time, the quote that you just used, which I think came from Pete Navarro, the trade representative in the White House, was that 90 deals would be done in 90 days. And I have to try and do the maths in my head. But
how many is that a day?
We're not.
Oh no, not a day. It's been more than 90
we
days.
clearly haven't made 9. I'm not even clear we've made 5. Actually, actual deals. There's a couple of.
I think we're 2.
Right. But there's a couple. These things change by the minute. But yes, we still think there might be one from with India, and the European Union is the big uncertainty that we thought might have been settled. But in the past week, what we've learnt, certainly from the president and from some of his outriders, is that sending a unilateral letter asserting, in most cases, the same number that was on that blue chart that was paused, is a deal. And that is an interesting concept.
Right. And Donald Trump was asked about this on Tuesday. What happened to the 90 deals in 90 days? And here's what he had to say about it.
Oh, we've spoken to everybody. We know everything. It's all done. I told you, we'll make some deals, but for the most part, we're going to send a letter. We're going to say, welcome to the United States. If you'd like to participate in the greatest, most successful country ever. I mean, we're doing better than ever. We have I don't think, and you're going to see these numbers soon. We've never had numbers like this. We've never had investment like this. We have more than 90. We're going to have much more than 90, but most of those are going to be sent a letter. This is exactly what I said. Now, we've made a deal with United Kingdom. We've made a deal with China. We've made a deal. We're close to making a deal with India. Others we met with, and we don't think we're going to be able to make a deal, so we just send them a letter. If you want to play ball, you have to. This is what you have to pay.
So Trump would go on to say a letter is a deal. Faisal, is a letter a deal?
No, it's not. I mean, a deal normally requires the agreement of two parties, at least two parties, to be fair. And one is, it is what it is. It's a letter that's unidirectional. It's going from one person to the other, and it's unilateral. It hasn't been negotiated. And as I said, with one exception, which I'm sure we'll come on to, which is Brazil, it's almost exactly the same as the numbers that were announced on the blue board, which at the time, you discussed it on Americast, was the subject of some highly complicated equation that basically reduced down to the size of the trade surplus, so the difference between imports and exports. So it's essentially, in my view, a sort of reincarnation in another form of that blue board. But here's the interesting thing: it hasn't caused the market ructions that we had 3 months ago. And that's probably, in fact, it is because alongside this series of letters asserting these highish rates of tariff was not the immediate enactment of them, but a delay till August the 1st, which is not a huge delay. You can understand that, it's not necessarily, we can have an argument about whether this is a giant rowback, the taco thing that you talked about, but it was enough, I think, to instill the idea that actually, when it comes to August the 1st, it'll probably be delayed again. Do they really want, when push comes to shove, do they press the big red button on these things when they're really going to be enacted?
Yeah, and it feels like this is almost a bit of a, now that we're talking about these letters, it's slightly that thing of, like, we have decided something and you kind of have to agree with us. And if you don't want to play in the way that we want you to, like, you don't want to play by our terms, then actually, sorry, that phrase when he says, we're saying to them, if you want to participate in the greatest country ever, then you kind of should. But you wonder, how people are, whether this will end up being a triumph, and he'll say, oh, look, I played hardball and in the end, we got these deals and this is what we wanted. And it was all part of the plan. Or whether actually this is just kind of turning people off, as I suggested, who are like, I don't really want to make this deal. If I'm going to end up in the place where I started, there's sort of no point in engaging in a back and forth like that.
Well, my takeaway, if you try and strip out the words and you try and strip out the theatre and you look at the facts, there's one big strategic point here, which is, like, understandably, this is Americast. We're focused on the White House centric view of the world, which is sending the letters. I've always said right from the beginning is it really does matter what the rest of the world thinks, not just individually, which I think is the basis upon which the White House would like to deal with all these countries one-on-one, in which case America's the most powerful in the world and much more powerful than every single other individual country, but how they act sort of together as well. And even if there's an argument in the States about whether the tariffs will damage the US consumer and US businesses, it does matter that the rest of the world believes in conventional economics that studied at university, that it definitely will. Because it means that they're thinking, we're just going to sit this out for another month. We think it will hit the American consumer. We think it will hit American businesses. We think the US retailers will march up to the White House and say, we can't restrain prices going up. We can't prevent potential empty shelves, as did occur back in April in regards to China. And that there's a dynamic here where you allow America to negotiate with itself and its own markets. And I think the real tell for me was Japan and South Korea, because you would expect, with the relationship particularly Japan has with the States, and I've dealt diplomatically with the Japanese for a long time, incredibly diplomatic, incredibly polite, and they are furious, absolutely furious that their number one ally in the world is sort of treating them in a way that they cannot fathom, right? And I want to be very careful about this, because I don't think they will actually do it, but it is noted that Japan now holds the most amount of American debt, stockpile of US treasuries in the world. And the precise quote eludes me, but he just let the idea, the Japanese finance minister, go that this might potentially be a form of leverage back at the States. Now, this is not the sort of thing you'd expect from the Japanese. So the mere fact that they don't shut it down immediately for me was a directional sign. That's Japan. Imagine that in other countries. And so I guess, yes, Donald Trump is playing hardball. My point would be what has been revealed is much of the rest of the world is playing hardball back.
Right, and it's almost like they view the United States as in a hostage situation where they're holding the gun to their own head, and so okay, if you want to shoot the hostage, you're shooting yourself in the head. But to get back to the deadlines again, because I think you hit this right on the head, and that is that the letters are basically a gussied up version of that board we saw, the poster board on April 2nd. The real change here was the new August 1st deadline. And so if that's the case, then how seriously should we take this August 1st deadline? Is he going to punt it again like he did after April 2nd and now he's done in this case? Or is he going to start really, as you mentioned, hitting the big red button? And Donald Trump was asked about this, and this is what he said on Monday, as these letters were first starting to come out, where he seemed to leave himself a little bit of wiggle room.
I would say firm. No, I would say firm, but not 100% firm. If they call up and they say, would like to do something a different way, we're going to be open to that. But essentially, that's the way it is right now, yeah.
So then the next day, after saying firm but not 100% firm, he seemed a little bit more firm on Tuesday and took a somewhat harder line. Here he is on Tuesday.
Just to make it clear, it wasn't a change. It was August 1st. We don't change very much. Every time we put out a statement, they say he made a change. I didn't make a change. A clarification, maybe. No, August 1st they pay. And everybody pays. Everybody has to pay. And the incentive is that they have the right to deal in the United States. If they don't want to, they don't have to pay and they don't have to deal here.
So it went from not 100% firm to, no, it's been August 1st this entire time, everyone else is wrong. I mean, it's kind of a mixed message, a bit chaotic. Marianna, what do you make of that? What should we believe?
I mean, we've been chatting about this a bit, haven't we, Anthony? We spoke about it on the last episode, but this kind of U-turn thing, like, is Donald Trump doing U-turning a bit more than he perhaps used to? And it used to be quite hard to pin U-turns on him, not least because he then says, of course I'm not doing any U-turns. This feels a bit more like a road extension rather than a U-turn. Like he's just going to keep building more road until it takes him to the place he wants. I don't know what you think, Faisal, in terms of the level of genuine strategy versus reactive response / chaos.
It's worth stepping back quickly. In his mind, and I can see that this pressure is working, he sent a message out to the whole world, particularly those that export to the US, the world's greatest consumer market, that if you want to sell in, you basically have to build in America or pay a fee. And I mean, the World Economic Forum at Davos in January, it was extraordinary to see that beamed into the European executives. And so you are seeing moves in markets slowly where people are sort of thinking, well, maybe we have to shift production to the States. The sheer uncertainty we have seen, back and forth, U-turns, are they pausing, what's the actual agenda here, has meant maybe you've got less of that than you might expect. There has been a real impact on revenues into the US Treasury. That is at a record level in May. They'll see more of that and they'll be happy, given deficit issues, to have that cash in. But what's the overall effect on the economy? And we've seen a very real impact on the value of the US dollar, which has fallen against world currencies 10% in 6 months. Now, that is huge. And it goes back to a question of what is the motivation here? Is the motive to shift factories to the US? He was elected on that basis. You can see why he'd want to do that. Or if you are trying to do that, some White House theorists, some people, the current chief economist of the White House, just before he entered, has said actually the real game here is that the dollar is too expensive, that the US is considered to be a safe haven around the world, that this is not a privilege for the US, it's a burden, and taking some of the heat out of the value of the dollar is the way that you make US exports cheaper, I really am going back to my old economics days, but this is actually quite fundamental. If we're talking about this here, imagine what's going on in the Japanese Prime Minister's office or the Malaysian, all around the world. They're like, what is he actually trying to do? Maybe some strategic confusion is helpful in this regard, but some people believe it's to reduce the value of the dollar, and some people believe it's to move factories.
Yeah, I put that question directly to Donald Trump a few weeks ago. What's the goal of these tariffs? Is it to reshore manufacturing here in the United States? Is it to generate more revenue from imports, so people are paying tariffs and it's bringing more money into the coffers? Is it a negotiating strategy to achieve some sort of other policy priority, a foreign policy tool, basically? And his answer was essentially, why can't it be all of them? Which, I mean, there are contradictions there. You can't bring more manufacturing to the United States and get more tariff revenue. But he just refused to make a choice there.
And Anthony, moving on from the various other places we've been chatting about, like Japan, for example, what do we know about Brazil, and specifically how what's happening with Brazil seems connected to Donald Trump's relationship with Bolsonaro, who's the former president?
Right. I mean, we just got a letter yesterday, and these have been form letters, almost word for word, exactly the same. All of these letters sent to South Korea and sent to Japan and sent to African countries. The letter to Brazil was a little different in that it specifically highlighted Jair Bolsonaro's prosecution, the former president of Brazil, for leading or instigating an insurrection after he lost a presidential election, saying that was part of the reason these tariffs were going to be up at 50%, which was a lot higher than that April 2nd placard level, which I think was about 20% for Brazil before. Also saying that Brazil was censoring free speech for American social media companies, and that was another reason for this. So essentially, this looked like evidence that what Donald Trump wants to use tariffs for isn't just to make revenue or to reshore manufacturing, but as a different kind of a policy goal, as a tool to browbeat Brazil into changing its domestic policy. Although Faisal, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be. Doesn't Brazil have a trade deficit with the United States? The U.S. actually sends more to Brazil than they send here.
Well, these figures vary depending on whose figures you use, the sort of the importer or the exporter. But you're absolutely right. Credible measures say that there is no deficit for them to deal with, even though that's what it says in the letter. The thing around social media was, of course, that Brazil banned Elon Musk's X, but then he paid a $5 million fine, and it was the act of them sort of extracting that revenue that he seems to reference in the letter. Is there not a bigger point here, which is we talked about the motive, and you got to question the president on this. It does rather blow up the idea that it is about the trade relations.
Yeah.
It's about something else. And then here's what I'm fascinated to hear about, Anthony, which is, how does this affect, and how seriously is the court case that said it was this whole process, or the use of the special emergency national security powers, was illegal? Because what I do know is that part of the reason I think that other countries are playing hardball is that they think that there's a chance that the whole process might be rendered illegal. You definitely, if you felt that there was even a 50-50 chance, why would you give your best offer right now? You'd leave it to not just the markets, but the court system. Is that realistic?
Yeah, I mean, that's the first thing that I thought about when I saw this Brazil letter, is like, how can you justify this under that 1977 Emergency Economics Powers Law that the president is citing, that gives the president unilateral ability to impose tariffs in economic emergencies? How is Brazil's prosecution of a former president anywhere related to economic concerns in the United States? So if you're looking for a textbook case for a lawsuit to cite, saying the president is stretching this law as justifications much farther than Congress ever envisioned when they passed it. I mean, this seems to be the one, and I think there is still a view that courts may decide that all of what Donald Trump has been trying to do, with at least using this specific law, which is the one that gives the president really kind of immediate powers to impose tariffs very quickly, that they're going to strike them down. The court, on its first instance, that trade court said so, and then it got suspended while appeals were taking place. So as every legal process in this country goes, it's going to take time. But I could see countries looking at this, particularly Brazil, which it doesn't depend as much on U.S. exports. They might decide to take a wait and see approach and say, all right, well, let's see if Trump could actually prove this in court.
Just to bring it back as well to this kind of this political argument that seems to at least be playing a part in what's going on between Brazil and the States. Like when X so this was back in August of last year that X was banned in Brazil for a bit of time because of a failure to name, but basically it was the Supreme Court saying you guys haven't named a new legal representative in the country, and it was this whole debate around the issue of disinformation and stuff that wasn't true on the platform. And that's actually really relevant to within the context of Bolsonaro and the protests and attempted insurrection coup that happened after he lost the election, or these allegations of inciting that, that all kind of related to disinformation that was spreading on a variety of social media platforms. And the parallels between what happened in the States in terms of January the 6th and, allegations that were leveled against Donald Trump about his role and others' role in saying things that weren't true about the election being stolen, of which, there's no credible evidence has been provided, and the violence that ensued and those riots that took place. And, obviously now in the States, the situation looks very different around that. Like Donald Trump hasn't been, various cases and charges have been dropped. Lots of the people who were in prison were, as he calls them, the January the 6th sort of hostages were released. And so you can see how he's saying, well, hang on, we've done this, so you guys need to do it too. But you do think that if you're looking on as someone who, I guess if you're a hardcore Make America Great Again kind of person, you think, great, Donald Trump is projecting his values onto other places and I care about that and I agree with him. But if you're kind of the average person and you think, oh, I thought he was doing this in our economic best interest, but now it kind of seems about something else.
Yeah. And then you imagine, is the same thing going to happen with the European Union, who have
also been pretty sort of hard on disinformation.
Well, but they also take regular chunks out of the big US tech firms in terms of regulations, in terms of monopoly powers, and possibly, and this is a new avenue, actually in the UK as well, over what we would consider disinformation. There are new powers have just come into force here, which definitely, when the negotiation was happening with the UK, an interest was taken by the US side in that. UK didn't yield on that. And also the tech tax. So a number of different things. I mean, I think Anthony made a sort of comment there, which is like, you can't achieve all of these outcomes with this one tool. If you want to raise the money to fill a gap in your public finances, in the deficit, then if they move the factories, you won't raise any money. Equally, if you want to use it in economic terms, then how much leverage is there? The bottom line is this, though, which is they have, the US is building around it a tariff wall, on average, which was sort of 2 to 3% for many decades, for 40 years. That is now 15%. 15% is the average effective tariff. That is a big move.
Yeah.
And you would expect to see it starting to hit the US economy and consumers. When I was over in April, we met a toy manufacturer, retailer, who said that she didn't anticipate during the holidays, during Christmas, as we would say, being able to put prices on her catalogue. She was going to print a catalogue without prices because they were so confused about what was going to happen, particularly with China. But I'm intrigued to know from Anthony whether is any of this hitting home? Has it affected people's everyday shop?
Yes, and actually that raises a question that one of our Americasters, Jay, emailed to us on tariffs in particular. He says, we hear of some companies absorbing the costs and others planning on moving production to the U.S., but what do Americans feel about these tariffs now that they have had time to impact? So he's wondering the exact same question that you pose there, whether it's starting to take a drag on the American economy, if American consumers are starting to see prices go up. And there is some evidence that prices are going up here. I think the price of shoes, according to one survey, was going up about 4%. Apparel over the last 6 months, according to a study from DataWeave, it's an analytics company, going up 2%. That doesn't sound like a lot. $100 pair of shoes is now $104 pair of shoes, but it adds up, and it adds up enough that Americans may start to grumble about it, particularly when they were already sensitive to prices because of the post-COVID inflation, where prices at the grocery store, prices at the stores, all of that was going up. So this is certainly moving things in an opposite direction, and that maybe is being reflected in some of the polls we're seeing where public approval of Donald Trump's economic policy, his trade policies in particular, those have dropped down into the low 40s and even high 30s. And as we saw over the past 4 years, when a president starts to get in trouble on the economy, the public starts to turn against the president on the economy, everything else doesn't matter. That's what the public cares about when their finances are hurting. They don't pay as much attention to cultural issues or environmental issues or anything else. They want the economy fixed.
Yeah, and I was kind of thinking about this from the undercover voters' point of view, who I feel like Faisal is acquainted with them as well, my sort of fictional characters that exist across the main social media sites, and I use them to see what different people
still alive?
are seeing. They're still alive, very much alive, very to everyone's dismay. They live forever. They're charged up, ready to go. And I was looking at this just to see whether anything about, like, tariffs is quite like boring. I know that you're excited about it, Faisal. Excited is maybe the wrong
I don't know where you're going with this.
But like, it's not the kind of thing that generally cuts through on social media very much, except when it has things like the charts or like funny memeable moments. But what does often cut through is people talking about like the price of things. We've chatted quite a lot on Americast about eggs, for example, and people kind of saying like, "Oh, this feels more expensive or less expensive." I haven't seen it in. So when all the tariff stuff happened originally, Americasters might remember we sometimes talk about stories that like don't get that much attention, that might have not been on your radar but should be. And people might remember that because there was this kind of back and forth going on between China and the United States, there was this moment where TikTok was flooded with Chinese manufacturers and content creators saying, look, that, you know, you're paying this much for a pair of leggings in the States, and actually, you know, it actually costs this. And that's almost became like a bit of a pawn in this like trade war that was going on, and this kind of back and forth tit for tat. But that, at the moment at least, like there hasn't been, you know, letters are kind of boring, they're not charts, and it doesn't seem like the sort of direct consequence of the tariff stuff is being felt like acutely.
I think it's quite early.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
Quite early.
So it's like we won't have it now.
Probably, we're not far off though. I would say by the
end of July,
by the autumn. Well, certainly you've got to remember that at one point during May, the China tariff was 145%. You know, and obviously it's come back down again now. But you know, when we parked China in this conversation, but that comes back up. That their pause was slightly staggered, and that comes at the beginning of August, the pause or unpause. That is serious. If that is to shoot back up again, the tariff there, although they've been trying to do deals the whole time, then you've got serious questions about the sort of trans-Pacific trade, the sort of flotillas of ships containing Christmas presents, essentially, right? That you know, so like, and I think one really important dynamic here is I think markets are assuming this all just rolls over, that the harm done to the economy, the world economy and the US economy, that we're going to have a series of these deadlines and then it's going to calm down. That is what's baked in. Any diversion away from that, so that, you know, a letter goes to the European Union, which could happen at any time, for example, the China tariffs revert back up again, and you're going to see a shocked market.
Right, 100% tariff. That's not 4% on shoes. That would almost shut down trade between the United States and China, which we were beginning to see the impact of that. We had talked before about all of these empty dockyards because container ships were coming over here with nothing on them because the Chinese companies were not going to export at those rates. So maybe stores have started to stock up now for Christmas, so maybe we won't feel the bite quite as much at Christmas, even if they do go up. But as you mentioned, Faisal, it's out there, it's coming. And eventually these prices are going to start to go up. And, you know, we talked about kind of the academic theory behind trade and why it's bad. And the reason is because when you put tariffs on these imports, at least according to economists, then domestic industry, domestic manufacturing shifts, but they do so in a less efficient way. Maybe it's easier to make shirts over in Bangladesh than it is here in the United States. There are things the United States is better at than other countries. And so the idea for economists is that everyone does what they're best at, and therefore you pay the least, you get the most bang for your buck, and everyone essentially does better off by it. But changing the system now to try to protect the United States, that's going to have some very real consequences for Americans. And maybe some people have jobs that they didn't in industries that they didn't. But at least the economic view, Faisal, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the economic view is that everyone will end up worse off.
It is that. And then here's the other thing, which is it's not like the rest of the world is standing on ceremony waiting for the White House to change their view. And they're accepting the idea that you have a different approach now from the White House. It is a surprise. The likes of Tokyo are very disappointed by this. And so we'll see what consequence that has. But they are now starting to say, well, if we can't rely on the traditional role in the world trade system that Washington played, we'll just start to have to do it ourselves. We'll have to trade more amongst ourselves. The UK has signed a deal with India. The European Union is going around sort of chatting to everybody again. That China, yes, its exports so far this year are down 10% to America, but they're up 6% in the world. They're up 20% to Africa. They're up 7% to the UK. So, maybe that's of no consequence at all to the White House. Why should they care about that? But I don't know, strategically, what's Beijing thinking about this? They're thinking, oh no, our traditional trade route to the US, to Walmart, is now gummed up, and this is complicated. Do they see an opportunity, though, through trade and through presenting themselves as a more reliable trade partner, more of a strategic opportunity to get a hearing in other places like Europe, maybe like Canada, let alone Africa or South America? So there's a bigger canvas here, which wouldn't surprise me at all to see at a time when Beijing is coming up with some fairly impressive technology exports like electric vehicles. They're seeking to take advantage of this moment.
So we came into this asking the question of whether this was a part of Trump's strategy or this was chaos. And maybe having had this conversation, it doesn't really matter. Things are changing. The consequences are going to be the consequences, whether there was a plan or not. And we're now just going to have to see, how all of this kind of settles out. But a fascinating conversation. And Faisal, thanks so much for joining us. Your virgin foray into Americast.
See you on August the 1st.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the end of this episode. But as ever, we love to hear all of your questions. They can be about tariffs or they can be about anything else that you're interested in. Do get in touch with us. You can WhatsApp us +44 330 123 9480. You can email Americast at bbc.co.uk. You can send us a message on social media with the hashtag Americast. You can hop on Discord. Do you ever use Discord, Faisal?
I don't.
Well, you can find the link in the description to this podcast.
Yes.
Basically, you can ask questions on our little corner, our server, the Americast server, but there's also a newscast one. So people can ask away. And as ever, you hear Americast first and in full as a podcast on BBC Sounds. That is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to listen to more episodes, then search for Americast wherever you get your podcasts. Bye.